Okay, here at Business of Cannabis, Cannabis Europa, live in the podcast booth here at Barbican Center in London. Really excited to have my esteemed friend here. Hey, Chris, how you doing, my man?
Good. It's nice to see you on this continent.
I know, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Last time Chris and I were talking, you were in Denver. I was in Mexico City.
That's right.
I think. And previous to that, maybe we ran into each other in Vegas. And I don't know. I seem to see you in different places.
Anywhere there's a cannabis industry party, I'm going to be there.
And of course, my name's Shahbaaz, back with this podcast and really excited because Chris is doing some brilliant things across the industry. And he's been someone I followed for a while as it relates to global emerging markets in cannabis. Why don't we start with a little bit more of your background, how we came to be talking here today, and, some of the problems that you're solving today through the GCNC.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've now been in cannabis closer to a decade than not by quite a bit. So we, early on, I got a chance to run a fair amount of MJ BizCon, and I got a good view at that point of what the sort of industry complexities were, and I've been watching it ever since. But I always had an interest mostly in the international markets as opposed to, the chaos that is the US market. So when we left there, my business partner and I decided we really wanted to create a platform that would empower smart operators around the world to sort of grow the global ecosystem. So when we built the Global Cannabis Network Collective, it was promissory. Hey, come along and we will make this happen. Now we're 4 years into it, and it's nice to see our members starting and executing entirely new companies, brands, product formulations, laws all around the world because we're working together in a collaborative fashion to make it happen. So it's fun now.
It's like a firsthand MBA at international relations.
Oh my gosh, for sure.
Yeah. So you've had your start. You've been in cannabis for over a decade or close to
a decade now. Yeah, it's crazy.
So what does a functioning, what is a functioning emerging market? When do you get really excited about an emerging market is actually a better way to put it. Like, what makes you excited, and what are the signals that you look for in a global emerging market?
Yeah, I think what is really interesting right now is that if you wanted to, you could look at almost every place and say, well, you're emerging in some form or fashion. Some of you are coming along quicker than others, right? Like, I've been talking about Mexico, which is my second home, as an emerging market now for a painful amount of time. Yeah. Because they got the courts to say all the right things, and it got bumped to legislators, and they've been basically saying in the next 6 months for the last 4 years, right? Yeah. But those early indicators that we were looking at almost 4 years ago there were good. You had a gray market that was now approaching legal. You had courts saying that it's not terrible to have this as long as it's within certain rails. You had legislators who were starting to run on those platforms. As that starts to happen in earnest, and then you look in the back end and you realize that these economies are really seeing tax revenue and economic benefit and job creation and all that kind of stuff. If you like to nerd out on cultural anthropology and then economic theory and trends like I do, it's not actually too hard to pick winners. It's just a matter of, well, is it going to be in the next 18 months or the next 8 or 9 years? Yeah. Before coming on, we were talking about Peru. And to me, that is a great example of a market that has, relative to some of their neighbors, smaller population, but have quietly first passed a pretty flexible medicinal law. 2 weeks ago, they passed a new hemp law, but with pretty reasonable limits. And now they're building out that framework. And it's something that the domestic market there is just little by little expanding and growing and doing all the things you would want. But here we are in London and everybody's still obsessed with Germany. And you know what? That happened and it's kind of good. it's progress, and that's creating this other impetus. And so we're all here, and we're talking about that. But meanwhile, you've got Brazil, and you've got Peru, and we've got things beginning to emerge in Africa. Asia is a bit of stop and start, and each one of those has really great opportunities for people who are willing to pay attention.
Yeah, I want to go back to South America in a second, but you said something that just caught my attention. So Asia, we talk about Thailand, right? Thailand was all the craze.
Yeah, until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so what does that look like in terms of, obviously there was that government in place that repealed some of the, recreational laws and being a little bit more strict about it. So from, foreign direct investment type perspective, is Thailand still the place where, there's going to be this global burgeoning, recreational market? I mean, what's the take on that?
So my opinion would be they didn't kill the industry by repealing some of it, right? We saw this huge expansion of interest there, and I think it scared the government there a little bit, like we're going to completely lose control of this. Mm-hmm. Realistically, even the most ardent opposition in any market to cannabis, once that genie's out of the bottle, you don't put it back in. Then it's just a matter of do we tighten the restrictions or do we loosen them? But you can never go backwards in that sense. And so I think that's what we're really seeing in Thailand right now is a course correction, mm-hmm. and an abrupt one for sure, probably not done in the best way.
Yeah.
But I think it's still an area of opportunity for people who understand you have to invest, build relationships, do all that stuff. You're not going to come in, make a quick buck and leave. Like that's not how that's going to work. But if you've got a slightly longer timeline, I think it can be great.
You do a really good job of bringing leaders together from across, various jurisdictions, various countries. When we talk a little bit about this international relations piece, this economic and micro macroeconomic principles, these cultural anthropology kind of movements. What are you seeing in terms of trends amongst entrepreneurs in these emerging markets?
There's not much middle ground. Like they're either super aggressive but mostly selling smoke, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Or they're very pragmatic. You don't hear a lot from them because they're too busy building a business. But I think that the earlier era where we had sort of the most how do we say this? Sort of the guys who wanted to be on stage, the ones who needed the accolades, right? Mm-hmm. But weren't really running a very sound business underneath. Yeah. That era mostly is done. You don't see a lot of that. There's a handful left, but people have realized that you actually have to build the business in a way that is sound, has an end customer of some sort on the backside of it. We're not just going to build things or create it and hope they show up. I mean, that's a great movie from Field of Dreams, but that's about it, and so I think an era of pragmatism is coming in. I think that era of pragmatism is being led, frankly, by Europe. You don't have to agree with all the different frameworks, but you do have to acknowledge each one that exists operates at a federal level. They have international agreements with their neighbors. Like they've treated it in a way that's much more mature than, my home, where it's just chaos all the time.
It is chaos, and I'm huge on the New York market, heavily involved, and that's a chaotic market.
Yep, right? I have some projects coming up right now in New York, which we're trying to remind people in New York that it's always been a financial hub. It's always been a global business hub. I think that's the real long-term opportunity, actually, for New York. Right now, everybody's just obsessed with sort of their street block and their license and all that. But I think the future of New York is what the future's always been in New York, an international business and commerce hub.
Yeah.
People aren't quite there yet.
No, not yet, but I believe it's getting there. Now they have 150 stores recreationally.
They have way more than that.
Well,
that's the legal ones.
Those are the legal ones, exactly. Illicit stores
shows the market opportunity.
Exactly. So, all right, let's go back to recreational and medical. Right. So you said Peru has some really favorable medical laws right now. I know Brazil is also on the medical front.
Yep.
Europe, obviously, Germany recreationally legalized, right? In a sense.
Yeah.
You have the U.S. that has this, recreational medical perspective. You have Canada that's, very recreational and kind of forgot about the medicinal market, but the medicinal market's still thriving. So the future outlook of the global cannabis industry, is it recreational? Is it medical? Is it hemp? What is this market? This because
it's all of it. I mean, we keep thinking that cannabis is different. And I mean, culturally at the moment it is, but people aren't always super excited when I say this, but it is still a plant and thus potentially a commodity. Mm-hmm. And so I think how it manifests in the future, is it medicinal at a pharmaceutical level? Yes, absolutely. Can we also take it and make it textiles? Yes, and that is a whole nother segment. Will it be consumed recreationally and hopefully, loosened up a little bit as we diminish stigma around the world? Yeah, it's that too. And that's what makes it so interesting, because all of those are different aspects of this plant. But in the future, will we be at cannabis industry trade shows, or will it just be that cannabis is in every industry trade show in some form or fashion? And I think that's where it lands eventually, is that this kind of show that we have here, I think we've got a good run still ahead of us. But as the walls come back down, why would you not have hemp at a show, a construction show? Of course you would. Why would you not have them also in fashion? You would. Food, sweets and snacks, all of those. That's where we're going. I mean, that's what I was working on 5 years ago when we were looking at industry adjacent partners for trade shows that I was building then. Because all of those, the solar energy trade shows back then, they wanted to know, how do we get cultivators to come to our conference? And so we were doing partnerships there. That's the future of this industry, is all of those.
That's a very hot take and a beautiful, wonderful prediction. Still ways to get there.
Maybe. I mean, I think for those of us who wish it was here yesterday, it's going to be a while. But in the big scheme of things, if you look how far we've come in the last 10 years and projected out another 10 years, I think every one of those things could happen in different parts of the world within the next 10 years, no problem.
So I got to ask, because you're just hot on the predictions right now, who's going to be the next country or the next group of countries to start to look at or federally legalize?
I think, that's a little bit harder because, number one, it's hard to predict. You got to look at everybody's election cycles and everything else. But number two, there's only really a handful in the world who aren't looking at it in some form or fashion. I think anybody that is looking at the expansion of especially the agricultural side and what then you can create with that. I've talked to folks from at least 6 or 7 African countries about, how do we continue to expand this industry? They've got great opportunities there. I think from a continental perspective, I'm watching Africa really closely right now, mostly because it's such a sort of closed box for a lot of people. And when you start talking and looking at what the governments are doing there, they know they will be the supply chain for Europe. And so they're looking at how to do that.
And I mean, my family is originally from East Africa, so that's music to my ears, but I know stigma, a whole variety of different pieces come into play there. It just, regionally, it's such different beasts.
Yeah.
Where can people find more about you? Where can people find more about GCNC and the work that you're doing? Because it is truly amazing work, and it's really setting the stage for the global landscape of cannabis.
That's our goal. Expand the global ecosystem. We're at gcnc.global is our URL, and I'm Chris Day. I'm easy to find in the LinkedIns and the Google machines of the world, and my business partner is Jillian Reddish.
Cool.
She's been on the Europe tour mostly, so I was glad to get over and join you all for this one.
Amazing. Well, Chris, appreciate it. Definitely give Chris a follow, Jillian a follow. They're doing great work. They've educated me a lot as well. So really thankful and appreciative that you could be on this podcast with us.
Of course. Thanks so much for the invite. Thanks.
Appreciate you.